You are not like a reborn god, all right? No, 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 no. Like, no questions asked. 6 foot under. Why is it so hard to say the word September? Absolutely. Gobble that shit up. What is the smell of purple? September was just not that month. I was thinking, all right, miss. What? That man is crazy. Something's wrong with you, all right? Oh boy. Hi friends, I hope you guys are all having a wonderful day so far. Get yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever is your preferred beverage. Mine is always boba. I have a cup right here that is almost empty. And let's get into September's monthly wrap up. Now, September was a month full of decision making and a lot of thinking on my part. So I'm about to see how my reading reflects all the stressors that I've been having in my life and also like everything that has happened. I'm kind of excited to see the stats. Well, okay, I have already seen the stats, but I'm excited to share with you all the statistics. And also, this is going to be a fun one and a long one because I have a lot of opinions on some of the books that I read for the month of September. September was definitely a month that I honestly felt like I was using my brain quite a bit from all the books that I was reading. And I'm here to share with you all what my thoughts are. As always, everything is going to be timestamped below, and any booktubers that I mentioned will also be in the description below as well, along with like where I mentioned them. And without any further ado, we're gonna kickstart this video off with how many books I read this month, which is a total of 12. I think this is on the lower side of things in the past quarter, but it's still a very solid amount. What is more interesting is the number of pages that I read this month, which is approximately 3,600. Now, 3,600 pages is not a bad number whatsoever, but in comparison to the last quarter, it is approximately 500 to 600 pages less than usual. However, if we were to look at the grand scheme of things, which is starting from, I want to say January all the way till now, I do think that this number is very close to the average. Of course, we're not going to know what the exact average is until my yearly wrap up, but overall, I'm still super proud about how many pages I read and how much I read, considering the kind of books that I was reading and all the thinking that went into all these books. Because I don't know, man, I was thinking like I was cooking something, all right? And I can't wait to have the discussion with you all on these books because I feel like I have so many thoughts that I was writing them on Goodreads. And by the way, if you're not following me on Goodreads, the link is in the description as always. And also, I was just thinking about things. I was writing it on Goodreads. I was writing in my journal. So lots of things to talk about. Okay, before I get even more sidetracked, let's talk about the monthly breakdown for September. You guys can clearly see on the screen when my reading slump started. The first half of the month kind of came pretty strong, if I do say so myself. I was just reading and listening to audiobooks at the same time. So I was really devouring a lot of content in a short amount of time. But by the second half of the month, you guys can clearly see that it shrunk quite a bit. I don't think I got over 50 pages a day, which is below my average reading speed. I usually go between like 75 to 100 or even a little bit more. And that's just how I like to read. I do a lot of binge reading. I think this has to do a lot with the fact that I was going through like a career change and making my decision for my career. I think that impacted my like mental to read, but also I don't think Clytemnestra helped. Clytemnestra kind of put me in a reading slump, and I don't think that helped. So the first half of the month was really rough. I read a lot of books that just didn't spark joy, and it really caused me to dwindle down my reading. Okay, enough blabbering about the books themselves because you guys will hear about it in a little bit. Now let's talk about how that impacted my star rating. My star rating this month was 4.10, which is quite honestly a lot higher than I expected. I really thought I would go down to the 3-pointers this month, but it seems like we had some really solid 4 to 5 star reads that tipped the scale to the other direction. Because if you guys see the breakdown, for the first time since I started doing these monthly graphs, we see some 2 and 3 stars on the screen. Yes, I did give quite a bit of books lower than a 4-star rating, which is a little bit surprising on my end. Generally, I rate books out of enjoyment, and I think a big reason for why this is on the lower scale of things was because September was just not that month, because I found some books that were were just average or below average reads, which I have to say was surprising. Of course, we can't have a hot streak month after month, so I'm perfectly fine with that. It shows that, you know what, I do have taste and I do have preferences. All right, let's move away from the star breakdown and onto my favorite number game, which is how much money I saved for the month of September. And I saved $116. Another solid triple digit month. Whenever I see that triple digit, I get so ecstatic. I'm really happy that I actively am starting to use my library more, because I just realized how much money I'm saving every month just from using my library. If you just queue up a bunch of books, they'll just slowly trickle in, and hopefully eventually you don't need to actively buy any more books. Definitely sometimes new releases are hard, but I'm happy that I have a giant backlog of books to read. And as you guys can see on the screen, a lot of the books that I got here were backlog from quite a bit of time ago, and some of them are just readily available because they're not like the current trending books. But that doesn't make them bad books. In fact, out of like this whole loan list that you guys see over here, I think I rated most of them 4 stars or above, if I recall correctly. Only one of the book is a bit of a disappointment, but regardless, if I went out and bought that book, I would have been so upset if I rated it super low. I'm always like a little bit ecstatic and happy because that meant that I saved money. I would have been so upset if I spent money on a book and it ended up not being what I expected. Like, it would feel like a waste, which is one of the biggest reasons why I love supporting my local library and using it, because it saves me so much money and the mental distress that I would have gone through realizing that I purchased a book that I hated. Now let's head back onto more graphical data with the reading formats that I had for this month. Mangas and manhwa dominated the month of September with over 50% of the books that I read that were categorized as such. And then coming at second place is audiobook. Surprisingly, I did not do a lot of physical or ebook reading. So a lot of the media consumption that I had were via mangas and manhwas, and I believe they were kind of like physical, like books themselves, but I like to have it as its own category because a lot of the times I do read on like official sites like Viz or Tappytoons or Tapas. So it's a gray, weird area where it's like digital format, but not really a book, but then sometimes you can get it as a book. I'm going on a tangent as always. Let's move on. And what that basically means is that last month I did not do a lot of like ebook reading or physical book reading aside from the mangas, and I'm really enjoying audiobooks. I think they're just so nice to get you going through the day. Like when I'm doing chores, audiobook. When I'm cooking, audiobook. When I'm driving, audiobooks. When I'm walking my dog, audiobooks. Like, I think that's why it's currently slowly climbing the ranks of being the format that I prefer. And I think that's pretty interesting because if you look back last quarter, I don't think I did that as intensely. But we will have to see when I officially put out my Q3 reading statistics. Moving on to genre overview, romance has once again taken back its throne and coming in first, which is at no one's surprise. What is surprising is that I read a lot of fantasy books in September. In fact, I think I might be a little bit fantasied out, I'm not gonna lie. It's definitely a reason that I haven't been reading much, since also all the books that have came onto my Libby queue are also fantasy books. So I'm kind of dying here. I'm kind of not vibing with fantasy at the moment, even though I have Fourth Wing. I know Bonnie Nicole really liked it, and I was waiting for it for months. You guys don't understand. I had this since like summer, and it finally came through, and I don't know, I'm just fantasied out. I don't want to go back in the queue, so I have put my Kindle on airplane mode, but I don't know if I'll read it by end of October. So we'll have to see what's gonna be happening in the next couple of days, all right? And then after fantasy, we have historical and dark, which I'm trying to think back as to why and what, but you know what? It makes sense. We have Diary of Anne Frank, pretty dark. When I categorize things as dark, I mean it as genres that depicts kind of like the horrors of life even, or just elements that make you feel like a little bit depressing. So I think that's how I categorize dark, but that might not be what most people categorize dark as, but Diary of Anne Frank is considered dark to me, and also The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, because there's just something about realizing the horrors of life and everything that goes through it. Like, that to me is dark. When people say dark romances, I don't know. I don't know how to separate those categories, but dark romances for me isn't as intense as like reading these historical books and seeing the atrocity of war, basically. I'm like all over the place with my genres. Maybe I need to do like a deep dive on how I want to break everything down, but that is not the discussion for this video. Let's move on to the book that I am rolling over for October, and it is Penacony World 1. This is actually a video game, so it's not really a book, but I rolled it over and I'm including it because I started playing it at the end of the month just to try to pick myself up, try to get me to get through reading a little bit more since I was in a little bit of a reading slump. It was my way of kind of enjoying a game and also doing the reading and not feeling like I'm not reading. Even though like it's completely fine to not read, I think that I wanted to help myself get back into the groove of reading, and that's why I started playing the video game, which was a mistake because that world, or like part one of that world, wasn't it. Like it's not my favorite. Like at this point, it's already like October almost 20th. I have already played it and it wasn't it. Like it was not a storyline that would have gotten me back into reading, but it's okay because I picked out some awesome audiobooks to start off October, and that's what really got me back into reading. And for the very last slide, I have ongoing reads that will continue until the series end. I just wanted to briefly mention it because this is a webcomic that I picked up, and this is very low stakes, all right? This is Welcome Back First Love, and it's a very low stake webcomic that is just so full of fluff and cuteness. Like I adore them. They're so cute. There's just fluff. There's not too much storyline or anything. You get to see the dynamics between the male lead and the female lead, and then you flash a little bit back to their history, and it's just them slowly getting together and learning about each other or relearning about each other. And it's my heart is so warm when I think about the story. So I did pick it up in the middle of September. It is not completed yet, but I'm just putting it out there. I like to leave comments of when I start a series, and then I will talk about it once more with all the reviews and everything when it is officially completed or the season end and whatnot. Because with webcomics, graphic novels, mangas, for those of you who aren't familiar, they release it weekly, and so I like to keep up with the series so I don't get spoilers, even though I don't really care about spoilers. But sometimes I love the dynamic and relationships between the characters so much that I need to know like ASAP what's happening. So this is a webcomic that I will continue to monitor, continue reading, but I won't mention it. However, in my reading data, I will always log it as part of an ongoing read series. All right, now let's move on to the very first book, which is Clytemnestra. This is the book that I picked to read with Ellen at the LMA book club for her book club, and I actually also buddy read this with Shuba and Chelsea. I, unlike Shuba and Chelsea, actually have a very different opinion on this book. I gave it 2.5 stars. I did not like this book. I have a lot of thoughts about this book, and I thought I would share with you all why, from my point of view, I did not think this was a good book. I'm kind of excited, but I'm kind of nervous because I heard that Shuba and Chelsea really liked it, and it feels weird to be the odd one out, but I also want to share my thoughts and opinions and maybe get some feedback on it and just start a conversation. Of course, if you disagree with anything that I say, feel free to tell me about it. I want to have a discussion. It's an open conversation with me. Quite frankly, I'm a gamer. Nothing you will say will faze me. I have been through the trenches, all right? People who have played League of Legends from a young age, we have a wall built around us. Like nothing you say will faze me more than like a 14-year-old speaking to the microphone and saying some of the most horrendous things, all right? I faced it all, so I have to say, nothing you say will probably faze me, and genuinely, if it's something bad, I am just gonna delete it and not look at it, like period. It won't even cost me a wink of sleep, all right? Now, let's move on to my thoughts and opinions about Clytemnestra. For those of you who don't know, this is a Greek retelling about Clytemnestra, and she is Helen's sister. Most people would know more about Helen in Greek mythology. Helen of Troy, she's the reason why the whole Iliad happened and the Trojan horse. I'm not very like the most familiar with Greek mythologies. I'll say that right now. I know the broad strokes about the events that happens and the Greek gods themselves, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert, all right? But what I will have to say about why I personally felt like Clytemnestra as a book was not a successfully engaging book for me was because it lacks a lot of things that I personally like in Greek retellings. Now, what do I mean by that? Most of the Greek myths, for the most part, are pretty similar in every aspect. You can retell the Iliads multiple times. You can retell Hercules' trials multiple times and things like that. You can do variations of retellings. And so for me, the question now begs, what makes this variation better than another book? And Clytemnestra failed to do that. And what I mean by this is, before reading the book, I had a vague understanding of what happened to Clytemnestra and the major plot points and events of her life. Also, by the way, at this point, you will probably be spoiled for the story of Clytemnestra. However, I will have to be honest, if you already know the myth, you are kind of technically already spoiled for her content, all right? Because personally for me, when you read Clytemnestra, it's like very similar to the myth, so much so that I felt like it didn't add anything so that you could be spoiled in Clytemnestra. Does that make sense? So what I mean by this is, like, this is also another reason why I thought the retelling was poorly done, is because of the fact that if I were to read this book and someone asked me, hey, what are some spoilers about Clytemnestra, the book? But I have already read the myth. I already know her background. Like, what can this book show me that would be a spoiler? And I wouldn't be able to say anything because it's so one-to-one and there weren't any actual layers built on top of the base story. So in the story, we follow Clytemnestra and like major plot points of her life. And it's events that you would already know if you were to Google it up or if you are familiar with mythologies, right? Greek mythologies to be exact. And when I read a retelling of a book, I expect drama. I expect more conversation. I want to see her character completely fleshed out, the interpersonal conflicts and the conflicts in her life and everything to be built up a little bit more. However, in the story, we really get the major events kind of like thrown in there. So first, a big event here, and then we have another big event. There are like huge time skips and it goes all over the place. I just didn't feel like when I read these events that were happening, I was shook to the core or I felt like it added to the story of Clytemnestra. A really good example, I would have to say, and this is going to be a spoiler for Clytemnestra for the myth and also for the book. And also if you are familiar with Iliad and everything, I think you would already know this. So a really big plot point that a lot of people know is that Clytemnestra's oldest daughter gets sacrificed so that the winds will be in their favor when the army sail over to Troy, right? This is a really big plot point. And I felt like what makes a Greek retelling good is for me to feel something in this moment. It's horrible, it's horrendous, but it's no different if I were to read it from Achilles or from like another book is what I'm saying. The moments there, it just kind of happened and it's written that Clytemnestra felt this anguish and grief, and I'm not doubting that anguish or grief, but me as a reader, I did not experience it fully with her. I was not immersed in her story because we saw no character relationship between Clytemnestra and her oldest daughter. We saw no bonding, and it's even heavily implied that her oldest daughter is her favorite in the book, and yet we never get instances to see this at all. And also, I thought because this is a story about Clytemnestra, you would get more of an understanding of how she dealt with the abuse of her husband. And yet we see that he takes her by force when she was a young girl, and then we suddenly time skips to when she's a full-fledged adult with multiple kids with him. We never got to really see the dynamics between her and Agamemnon, so it made the revenge part even less satisfying. Like, I understand that he did some extremely horrendous things in the first part of the novel in her young age, but I wanted to see how their dynamic and how their relationship shaped Clytemnestra, what she was as a woman to stand up to him and deal with the abuse, what she had to go through. I felt like that would have added so much more layers to her character, but instead we kind of just skipped from when she was forced to marry him, so Agamemnon does some terrible things, and then we move on to a time skip where almost immediately he goes off to war. So we didn't even really get to see the two of them interact with each other, and we also didn't really get to see her eldest daughter daughter interact with Clytemnestra, because as soon as we got to the time skip, she's already gone and headed back to Sparta for the funeral of her father. So we didn't even see the interaction between her and her kids at all whatsoever. So for me, that just made her story feel really lacking. There's no extra meat that was added to her story, is what I'm trying to say. I didn't get to see the character development. I didn't get to see the character interaction. Everything was what the myth is, because the author really just skipped to the major plot points. And sometimes the minor points that take us from point A to point B is a lot more important than just getting us directly there. Also, a really big thing that it felt like this book was really marketed for woman empowerment, female rage. And yes, it is that on a surface level, but we never got to see the satisfaction of the revenge that Clytemnestra does. It was genuinely like one and done. And yes, I know that is what is written in the myth, but you can always add more meat to the bone. The bone is she went into the bath and killed him. And that's exactly what she did. But the meat to the bone would have been more satisfying if she has shown him, I don't need you. The people in the city values me as a leader. I lead with compassion, not with fear, right? If she was able to even say those things and show him that now she holds the power, and then just, do what the myth does, it would have been more impactful. But it was very lacking in that aspect. Also, it felt like the author wanted to write something about one of the daughters. She keeps hinting about the daughter and then like her sharp eyes and whatnot, but then it eventually led to nowhere. We saw nothing of it. So for me, it made the retelling of the story kind of not exciteful, and that's a big reason why I rated it so low. I just felt like I didn't get the substance from this retelling. This retelling did not add anything to the myths. It did not add any more characterization of Clytemnestra, because Clytemnestra in the Greek myth is a side character, a very minor character, but she's a character who goes through a lot of horrors and terrors in her life. And I just felt like we didn't get to see the characterization outside of that. I wanted to see more about her being a leader, how she ruled the land, and why the people ultimately bended to her, even though she killed the king of the land, right? I think that would have been more impactful. I think that us experiencing and seeing her relationship with her eldest daughter would have made her death more riveting and more terrifying, because now we would have that emotional connection and emotional bond with her eldest. But I think the author really skimmed on that aspect, and it made the retelling what it is, just a retelling without any of the extra bits to it. So I ultimately gave it 2.5 stars. It was not an enjoyable read. It is a rough read. It's a tragedy. It's a tragic story, and that's what Clytemnestra's story is. It's all about tragedy. And for me to read that, but also feel so disconnected from the story because the author didn't spend the time to build her character, build her world, build the interaction between the characters, it kind of felt like I'm just reading the myth again with a little bit more detail and like with a little bit more flavor and detail in terms of describing the halls, her body, the other characters. I just felt like that was it. the myth is what it is. So for me, this story was just a very base retelling with nothing else added to it aside from a little bit more characterization with like the life she gives. Like she's very heavy about talking about the decoration, the decor, the faces, what people look like, where they are, but not with any genuine connection between the characters aside from Helen and Clytemnestra. And even then, it was really hard to balance the beam on what we were supposed to feel about their relationship as well. So for me, this was definitely a pass. I'm glad to have read it, but I don't think this was in any way a retelling that I would pick up again. Now that I finished contributing my book talk discussion about Clytemnestra for September, let's talk about the first book I finished in September, which is The Immortal Life Henrietta Lacks. This book was originally a recommendation from Amanda from Be Kind and Read On, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is a biography about Henrietta Lacks, and we get to really see her contribution to modern modern medicine. The vaccines that you are getting has probably been tested on her cells. Like, that's how important she is as a figure. I felt like this biography did an amazing job about giving us a timeline and the facts of how modern medicine is built. And honestly, it is through a lot of mistreatment, malpractice, testing on people, especially in the African American communities. A lot of the medicines that we have here today do come from testing that people didn't even consent to. And Henrietta Lacks was one of them. This story is very emotional and honestly gave a lot of food for thought, but also I'm glad that her name is finally out there and her name is getting recognition, because her cells really are the foundation of a lot of modern medicine treatments that we have here today. And it was such a shame that it was kept in secrecy for such a long time. And also the practice in which the cells were harvested was not okay, because her cells were basically taken from her without her consent, without anyone talking about it. And then after her death was used to make money. People were selling these cells, commercialized it. And after all of that, her family didn't even get a single dime of recognition. They didn't even know that this was happening and that her cells went to the moon. Like, her cells are so impactful. They went to the moon to study how human cells would live and survive in zero gravity, basically. So this book was extremely good in that sense. I genuinely felt like this book made me think a lot. A really big moral from this book that I got is whether or not the name should be publicized at all. Because with the publication of her name, Henrietta Lacks's children and grandchildren were ultimately bombarded by people who wanted to test on them, and then also bombarded by people who were trying to profit off of them as well. So there's that also another layer of convolutedness into the idea of publicizing where the cell comes from. And then we have the question of ethicalness. Like, is it ethical to take cells from a patient's body? A really big argument that some people in medicine, when in discussion of Henrietta Lacks cells, were talking about how because she was getting free treatment at the time at Johns Hopkins, they were allowed to do these secret testing. They were allowed to harvest her cells. And I genuinely don't think that's right. It should have been disclosed. And I would like to say that because of her cells and the pushback that Deborah, her daughter, did on this, there came a lot of legislation surrounding testing on people without their consent, which I'm forever grateful for. But then we also have to think about the facts that a lot of the times, I'm not saying this as like it's a good thing. Like, I'm not saying I think we should be doing this, but you can also dismiss how important her cells were because of what that one guy did, because of that one guy's decision to be like, hey, let me just store your cells into a tube. It's messed up. It's completely messed up. Like, this is like the trolley problem, right? It's not similar, but it's in the same realm of like thinking about all these things. And I definitely thought about it. For me, I don't think it should have happened, but I need to also recognize that apparently medicine skyrockets, like the advancement skyrocketed when there's no rules in place. But without rules, it's just terrifying what they could do to us or what they could test on us. It's just a lot of morbid reality that hits me when I read this book, and that's why I gave it 4 stars. It's very good. It would have been 5 stars if not for the fact that I did not like this author. This author, her name is Rebecca Skloot, and she wrote herself into the biography. Like, I don't get it. I don't think she should have written herself into the biography, and I don't think she's any better than the people who harassed Deborah, who is Henrietta Lacks's daughter, to do this biography. Ultimately, Deborah warmed up to Skloot, the author, but I don't think Skloot was any better than all the people who come around harassing Deborah for money, harassing Deborah for like a lawsuit, frivolous lawsuits, or trying to get her to do some testing on her cells. Skloot proudly writes in her book that she used to call Deborah 2 to 3 times a week for a year long before Deborah gave in on her. Why are you proud of that? That is straight up harassment. How are you any better than anyone else harassing her for her story? It makes it no better. And even in the book itself, a couple of chapters before or after the incident of her being so proud about her resilience to continuously badger Deborah, she talks about how Deborah has almost PTSD or shock from just being continuously harassed by people to get more information on her mother. So for me, I'm just thinking, did that not click into your head? Like, why are you so proudly writing this in the book and inserting yourself into the book even? I genuinely think that Skloot has a savior complex. She did. She thought she saved the Laxus family almost. She even at one point gave a sermon and talked about how, paraphrasing, I don't have the book because I listened to it on audiobook from the library, but this is the vibe I got from it. She gave a sermon and she basically said because of her, the Laxus family, grandchildren, great-grandchildren will know the legacy that Henrietta Lacks has. All right, miss, you are not like a reborn god, all right? Please put that savior complex down. I did not like that at all. And the fact that she wrote it in, I don't understand why she felt the need to write that in. Like, it's almost as if she wanted to show herself of importance. Another part that really rubbed me the wrong way was when she was talking to one of Henrietta Lacks' son, and the conversation was just mainly about Henrietta Lacks. And then all of a sudden, she decides to include the fact that Henrietta Lacks' son, now says that the weight of Henrietta's legacy is bestowed on her. Yeah, I did not like that at all. I felt like did not add anything to Henrietta Lacks' story and her family story. It just felt like she wanted to write herself in as someone of importance. Like, a lot of these scenes reoccurred, especially by the end of the book, and it just really rubbed me the wrong way. And it goes without saying, how's this any different than all the other people who have harassed the Laxus family? She managed to get through to them, and I'm glad we were able to get a story, but I don't think she's any better. She's profiting from this book, is she not? From my own personal research, and I'll admit I didn't spend a lot of time on it, it seems like there's no clear indication on the money of this book. Where the money is going, what it's being used for, is it being funneled back to Henrietta Lacks' children? There's not very clear information about that, but she did create a foundation of sort and put some money into this foundation so that the Laxus family members and the grandkids, grandchildren, great-grands will have money for scholarship. And then this money is also supposed to be used for more underprivileged families in similar situations like Henrietta Lacks' family. But I genuinely don't think that's enough. You're profiting off of like someone's story. Like, it's horrible, it's terrible, and then you also included yourself into the book. I don't know how well known or publicized this book is, but I do know that it was made into a TV adaptation, a movie adaptation pretty recently. And I wonder where the money of that TV show or movie went to. A big thing that I realized and recognized while reading this book was that a lot of people were profiting off of Henrietta Lacks' name, story, everything about that. And then her grandchildren, her children, not getting a single dime from it. So I'm just curious. Like, I wish she was more upfront about where all the money is going. And again, with that movie too, I'm sure she got paid money to use that book and made into a movie. So I'm just putting it out there. I just wish we got to know a little bit more. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this book, even with the nonsense with the writer inserting herself in a biography. But I will say, get it secondhand or from your local library. I think it's probably better that way. Just because I wish she was more upfront about how the money is being used, even in the book itself. But we don't get to see any of that. In fact, she talked about how poor she was and all of this research she was doing is for herself. But I digress. It doesn't dismiss how great of a story Henrietta Lacks' story is. So 4 stars. I think it brings and raises a really good question ethically about doing testing on someone's body, even if it's not really their body. Like, where's the gray line of ownership over that, especially once it becomes commercialized, if it's being sold. And then there's also the question of publicizing someone's name attached to the cells that were harvested, attached to like the organs or whatever was used to get the data and research, like attaching their name to it, because then it comes to a badgering, like it creates a badgering effect where if whatever was harvested and created something revolutionary that science has never seen before, we get like people harassing and trying to test on the living subjects, the humans themselves. So there's also that layer of like ambiguity that I'm just wondering and thinking about. Like, this book brought a lot of thoughts, and I think it's a really good book for discussing and just realizing how morbid science really is, quite honestly. So yeah, 4-star read. I said what I said. I hate the author. Let's move on to another read for the month. Oh boy. Oh, so the next read is Caraval, and this is a buddy read with Ashley Beck's read. I gave it 2.5 stars. I think she gave it 3 stars. This book, nuh-uh, no. So I think I'm just not a fan of how this author writes. She writes very flowery and she has these vivid imageries that make zero sense. I'm okay with author using a lot of imageries. In fact, the book I'm currently reading right now adds a lot of it, but sometimes the imagery that she uses just doesn't make sense. I don't know. I just couldn't find myself connecting with the plot in any way. So this is many people's favorites, and it is not good. I'm sorry. If you love Caraval, I apologize. Please skip to the next portion of this video because I did not like it at all. 2.5 stars. What do I think about it? Oh my god. First, I did not like the writing style. It was very floral. It was very colorful. The author likes to write a lot of vivid imageries, but it doesn't make any sense. I said what I said, all right? You cannot compare some of these things together. I know she's trying to give the illusion of this magical place, and she failed to do that. Quite honestly, the whole time I was thinking about this Caraval game, I was just thinking about Carnival, and I also find the fact that she did not really world build at all. I wanted to know how magic really works in this world, but it seems like she just did whatever she wanted and whatever it fits. That's my biggest gripe about this book, and my biggest gripe when it comes to when magic is in play, because I like things to have a set amount of rules to them and something to follow by, like a certain structure when I read more magic-based books, because if you don't, you end up with a situation like Caraval, where the author writes and does what she wants and things happen as they want it to. And it really detracts from the book, in my opinion, because then I just see that, oh, well, if we're just gonna do that, why didn't you just do this? Or why didn't you just do this? So for me, this book really failed on that front, but also, it might also be because she forced a romance into the book, and I did not understand how in less than 6 days you managed to fall in love with this man to the point where people were worried you were going to use the wish to save him. Also, spoiler alert, spoiler warning, this is going to get into deep dive of what happens at the end of the book, and I hated it. I hated it so much. If my sibling did that to me, nah, get out, get out. That's ridiculous. Use your brain a little bit more, all right? Like, what? Surely you guys thought about something else from this. Okay, none of that was spoilers, so I'm gonna keep that, and starting now will be the spoilers. All right, now let's talk about Caraval. Caraval is a book about this magical place that allows you to watch games and also participate in the games themselves. And at the end, we have one winner, and that winner gets a wish. That's the whole basis that we're given about this world. And then we're dumped into the world immediately. We see the abusive father that they have. We get to see how abusive he is. But also, what is the smell of purple? Can someone please explain to me what purple smells like? Because the author puts it in a lot. And I understand being able to write like what purple smells like, but she consistently just says he smells like purple. And I just want her to just be like, oh, like whiffs of lilac or raw meat. Like, I just wish she like attached something with it, but she just kept saying he smells like purple. And every time I think about it, I say my mind doesn't work like that. I understand people have different minds and thought process and everything, right? Some people see months in a circle, some people see months in rows. I understand that concept, but if you're writing a book, I think you should put in a little bit more effort to explain what you're trying to sell with he smells like purple. Because for me, every time that text comes along, I just think of him with a waft of purple lime, but I can't like there's no connection between what it smells like. It's just visually what it looks like. Anyways, so we have this villainy dad who smells like purple and abuses the crap out of his children. Now, Scarlett, the older daughter, thinks that she could get them away from the dad by marrying off, because she's about to be married off to some dude that the dad has some relations with. Right? She thought she could protect the two of them by getting married and then taking her sister with her. You know what? Is it the smartest idea in the grand scheme of things? It might not be, but it's the most realistic. I thought that the naiveness of that is realistic because what? They're 16, 17, they don't know any better, and they live life with an abusive father. That makes sense. That makes sense to me, all right? The sister though? Nah, the sister has something else in mind. What she had in mind was joining the game of Caraval, but not to use the wish to get away from the father. That is not the wish. The wish is to be revived. Excuse Huh? Okay, let me break it down to y'all. What happens at the end? We basically see Scarlet go through all these trials and it's traumatizing, all right? She sees people dying in front of her eyes and then she gets to the end and she's like, we gotta get out. This guy, the ringleader of this place, is nuts. It's nuts so bananas. And I 100%, Scarlet, you are right. That man is crazy. And then we come to find out her sister has been spending time with the ringleader himself. Okay, that's weird. That's suspicious. And then they start playing mind games on her, saying that, oh, she's caught up in the Caraval excitement. She's going crazy. And then they show the ringleader as this bad guy who's trying to like trick the little sister with Scarlet. And then Scarlet looks like she's about to jump off and kill herself. Yeah, all right. That's the first layer of convolutedness that happens in the last, like, I want to say 25% of the book. And then her abusive stepdad and the husband that she's supposed to marry finds her. And then there's that family feud drama back and forth, and her sister kills herself by jumping off of the balcony. And that's where Scarlet gets that enraging empowerment and rage to finally separate from the father by blaming all of this on her father, saying that the reason why her sister is dead is because of her father, and that none of this would have happened if he wasn't so abusive and we ran away from home to avoid you, basically. Of course, back and forth, she tells her father basically the ace in her sleeve, saying that don't you ever come after us again, because I will tell your general that you killed his child. Because apparently at a young age, Scarlet saw her father kill the general's daughter, the person who's sworn to protect him. So that was her ace up her sleeve all along. She didn't think of this until now. So she tells him, GTFO, get the hell out of here. I don't want to see you ever again. And he does so without any resistance, because if your general finds out that you stabbed his back, who's going to be watching after you, right? So now the father and the supposedly fiance is out of picture. Now we have her dead sister and her, and she runs down, she cries, and she wishes for her sister to come alive, and she does. And then her sister tells her that this was her plan all along. What the fuck? I'm sorry. I try not to curse on this channel because I don't know what the YouTubies are gonna do to me, but excuse me. So apparently it was actually in their plan that the sister was going to kill herself so that Scarlet can finally be free of her father. And the reason why this makes everything a little bit more convoluted is the fact that like the magic doesn't really work the way it works, but it's enough magic to bring someone else alive, but it's not enough magic to break away from her father. Like if Scarlet were to wish that, hey, I don't want to be connected to the father anymore, the ringmaster was basically saying like, yeah, that's not how it works. What do you mean that's not how it works? Please tell me how this magic system works. You cannot make it willy-nilly, Garber. So Garber sets up this whole story, but I felt like she really lacks the foundation on how the magic is done, because at one point she saw two guys die during her time at Caraval. We have guy A and guy B. Guy B is her love interest. She saw guy A die and she also saw guy B die. But for some reason, the guy B survives, but guy A is permanently dead because that's how the magic works. What? I don't understand how it works. I was genuinely so frustrated while reading this book because the magic doesn't make sense. I believe Stephanie Garber tried to make the magic very whimsical and like, oh, fairy dust sprinkle here and there. No, it just didn't make sense. Like when you set up a world, you need to have rules and things in place, or else anything that could be a plot hole, are you just gonna whisk it away with magic? But instead, she just created more plot holes. And also a big thing that I saw in the book was the reason why guy B was resurrected was because he's a cast member, but so was guy A, but then guy A died under like different circumstances, so the magic doesn't work. And also the whole thing stems on the fact that Scarlet, our main character, uses her wish to revive her sister. There's so many things that could have gone wrong. First, what if Scarlet didn't win the game? They fully expected her to win the game. So first of all, are you telling me the game is rigged? And we don't really see much of the other contestants and what their progress are. It's very solely based and focused on Scarlet. We're also given the fact that apparently most of the actors, the cast members, will not die if something happens to them in Caraval. So why don't we use some of that magic that you made the cast member have on the sister? Because otherwise, if the sister dies and then Scarlet didn't do what she was supposed to do, if she didn't have enough emotion and feelings to trigger this magic that we don't know how it works, like how is that supposed to happen? The whole resurrection thing just made zero sense to me. I really didn't like the plot. I didn't like the writing. It was not a good read. I might sound like a hater, but I really did not like it. They were full of plot holes. If my sibling did that to me, bro, you are Like if I resurrected you and you told me that, you're going back 6 foot under, all right? Like no questions asked. 6 foot under, you're going back down again. I cannot believe the amount of stress you put me through instead of both of us talking and coming up with a realistic plan to escape the father. And I think part of the reason why Stephanie Garber did not build a world outside of Caraval, or at least for the very first book, is because she doesn't want us to know about any other possibilities of escaping her father. We never seen any other attempts on escaping from her father. We aren't given information about the resources. We just know that they're on an island, so they would need to travel. Like there's a lot of things she could have done with the world and the world building and come up with a better way to escape the abusive father, but we didn't, and we had Caraval. Not a good read. 2.5 out of 5. Would not do it again. Moving on from one popular fantasy book to another, we have coming in next, Powerless, and I gave this 4 stars. 4 stars is generous, but I was really vibing with the book, all right? And as you guys all know, I rate all my books based on my enjoyment first, and I really enjoyed this book. This book was heavily influenced for me to read ASAP from Jessie and also Trapped in My Bookish World. I love this book, but it is really, really cheesy and predictable. I'm telling you right now, everything you get from this book is what you expect. There's nothing new or revolutionary about this plot that I would say like, yes, I would read it because of this. The characters were also fine. I wouldn't say that they're my favorite characters or I love them, but they were characters that were fun to vibe with. I absolutely love the banter between them, but the banter is so cringeworthy cheesy. I listened to it as an audiobook, and I think the voice actors did a very, very phenomenal job. It's so much fun. I do cringe and die internally sometimes with the way they talk, but overall, I had a blast with it. This is a battle royale type of book. If you're not familiar with battle royale, think of the Hunger Games. Basically, it's a competition of some sort, and ultimately, you end up with only one survivor or one winner. A lot of the times, it is fight to the death kind of an idea. This one is not technically fight to the death, but if some death occurs, it's whatever. Now, the main story basically follows our main character, who is a powerless, and she's just trying to fit in with the world and trying not to get caught. She basically tells anybody who asks her she has a very mundane power, which is the power of foresight. She's able to touch someone and predict what their life has been like and guess little details about that person. So she, our main character, is able to fool people by doing that. Overall, I think this book was a very fun and fast read. It's fast paced. The romance, I do want to say, is cringe. Like, you will read this and I genuinely think that you might just kick up your feet screaming because like, oh my god, how can you actually say that? Like, how can you do that? How are you dancing in the middle of a battle royale? Because they did that. They were like slow dancing in the midst of a competition where the enemies can literally kill you. So I'm just saying, it's definitely not head first kind of romance. I do like the two characters. We have this broody, grumpy male lead, my favorite, and what she calls him is a cocky bastard, and their flirtation is beautiful. I think it has its moments, all right? I don't know. I just really like their character dynamics, even though I'm thinking about it and I'm just internally like going like, oh my god, because I remember how many moments where I was just like, I can't believe they just said that. So overall, I think if you're just looking for a fun night light romance, this is it. Even though there are aspects of murder and killing in it, the story is very YA, and that's kind of like what I expected going to this. So I still really enjoyed it. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I don't really know what I said about Powerless. I was just over here yapping about it. The most I got from it is how cringe it is, how cheesy the dialogue is, and how I absolutely gobbled that shit up. It's late. Like, I'm filming this late in the night, so a little bit of weird Mimi is leaking out, but that's fine. It really picked up my mood after reading Caraval and the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, so it made me really excited to read the next book in the series for sure. I am tired of I talked a lot. I talked a lot about the books that I had a lot of opinions on, so my throat is tired. But we still have more than half of my reading list to go, so let's get to it, all right? So the next set of books I'm going to talk about is part of a series, and it is Blue Flag, volume 5 through 8. I have finally finished the series, and I gave it a solid 4.5 star rating on average. This book was an amazing book for coming of age story that talks about sexuality and dealing with friendship, dealing with confusion in your life and your decisions and everything that you do. He talked a lot about the issues and everything stemming from like both friendships and also like sexuality as well. And I really, really enjoyed this book. Even when the conversations are tough, I felt like I didn't mind it as much because he also gave like a layer blanket of realism over it. And overall, if you're looking for an LGBTQ representation in a manga that does it really well and also a good coming of age story, I highly recommend Blue Flag as a whole. I wouldn't say it's low stakes, but it's definitely character driven stories and about these characters themselves. And I don't know, I just feel like they're my kids or like my little nieces or nephews and cousins. So I really enjoyed reading this book. The ending was a little bit rough, I'm not going to lie. I think it has to do with how the author wanted to wrap up the story, and I completely understand the intentions behind it. I just didn't think it was executed perfectly. I really didn't like the second person narration that suddenly it jumped to for the ending. So that was a little bit weird on my part. I didn't like that as much, but I don't think it took away from the messages and the story as a whole. And I know that the author's intention at the ending is supposed to state like a conversation about how we are the viewers, we are the readers. We're kind of like the people who look from the outside when we see a couple down the street, right? We can't process and understand their thought process completely. We can't see why they made the decision that they made, and it's ultimately their choice. Like, we as people who view others from like the outside, we don't have an impact on their decisions ultimately. So I believe the author was trying to do something with that, but I definitely wouldn't say it's well executed. But I still really thoroughly enjoyed the time and the journey that we started from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. And this originally was a recommendation from Lauren, and yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's an amazing read. I highly recommend it if you're just looking for a manga to get started in and you specifically want to read about coming of age and LGBTQ representation. The next read is Fate Grand Order, Kama's Interlude. Now, I gave this 3 stars, and I have already actually read this previously, and it is part of a video game that I played a lot, which is Fate Grand Order. Now, y'all, you don't understand how in-depth the Fate storyline goes. It's crazy long, and I'm pretty sure you guys have probably seen Heaven's Field and Unlimited Blade Works on Netflix, but trust me when I say the Fate universe is vast and it makes zero bonkers sense. But I think you can probably find a video of someone trying to break down the Fate universe and all the timelines and everything that happens, but I'm not going to do that here. And the story is specifically revolves around Kama, who is supposed to be the goddess of love, if I recall correctly. And the interlude is just basically a little snippet into her personality and life. It's a 3-star read. Like, I read it previously in the game, but now the artist has decided to draw out the actual characters into a graphic format instead of the light novel version where you're just reading the text. So we got the visual aspect of it. It's a little bit more enticing and a lot more fun because you guys can actually see the characters. But the storyline itself is really messy and like all over the place. That's the thing with like Fate's stories, is that sometimes they're a hit and then sometimes the misses are pretty big misses. So I give it 3 stars. I think the only real reason I read it is because I really like the character Kama in the game, and that's why I ultimately read this one. But the storyline is a storyline. Kind of chaotic. I don't have much to say about this book anymore, so I'm gonna move on to the next book, which is going to be Villains Are Destined to Die, Season 4. We have finally made it to Season 4, and it was so good. I reread Season 4 from start to finish. Season 4 is the peak of the peak. It's the creme de la creme of the story. We are finally hitting the climax of the plot, and it was climaxing. There are stuff happening, and it was so good. This is actually one of Lauren's recommendation, and I remember when I first started reading it, I was sitting on the couch for hours, did not move, with my phone in my face, just reading and reading and reading because it was so freaking good, and it delivers. It's that good. I'm really excited to see the next season, but it won't come out for another 3 to 6 months probably. And this season, the note that it ended on was so strong. Everything was happening in the story. I don't even know if I gave a rating for this, but obviously it's going to be a 5-star read. It was such an emotional emotional and intense read. It was suspenseful. There were a lot of things happening. And when the scene hits, it hit real hard, all right? I can't tell you guys what happens because spoilers, and I don't want you guys to know what the spoiler is if you do want to read it, because I think it was a very intense moment and it's like heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, pulsifying, suspenseful. I'm just plopping in any adjectives that I can think of into this because it was that good, all right? And the artwork is absolutely stunning. I am so grateful for the artist because I think she really did the novel justice, all right? I know that they're slowly publishing it as actual physical format, so I'm gonna wait until the end of the whole series, and I think I'm gonna buy all of them. Since this is book number 4, I don't really know how much of the plot I could give away without actually spoiling you guys. So you guys are just gonna have to do with all the adjectives that I threw on the screen. And if you guys want to know more about the basis of the story, I'll have the videos where I first initially started reading the book. And then hopefully maybe I actually talked about the synopsis in those videos up there somewhere if you guys are curious. All right, let's move on to the book that I read for Banned Book Week from September 22nd to September 28th. I specifically picked A Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. I gave this book 5 stars. It was a very depressing read and also made you realize how mortal our lives are and just how boiled down we are all the same people. We have the same thoughts, and it's just absolutely horrendous about the atrocity that Germany is doing. But before we get into all of that, I was actually reminded about this book and my want to read it from a long time ago from Renee at Beyond Books. She actually did a whole video about this book and kind of like why it's banned and all of that. So I'll have her channel and that video linked in the description. And as far as I could tell, the biggest reason for people trying to ban this book is because of the sexual explicit scenes. And all I have to say to that is like, this is just a rambling of a teenage girl. Like the sexual explicit scenes that you guys are thinking of is just the curiosity of a young girl learning about herself and her body. And trust me, it's not no more than a paragraph long of just kind of vaguely understanding the anatomy of a woman. That's it. It's nowhere like sexual. Like if you think it's sexual, it's on you. Something's wrong with you, all right? Because it is not sexualized at all. It's very almost methodical in the sense of just a girl's curiosity about her anatomy, and not even, there wasn't even like an inkling of any sexualness to it. It's just her learning her body. And I don't understand why they exaggerate for the claims of the ban. Like get creative, man. Like you can't just slap it's too sexually explicit on everything, all right? Just get creative. If y'all gonna try to ban books, at least put some creativity to it, all right? That's just a little bit of sass coming out. As for the actual content of the book, I can see why our teachers assigned it to us as a high school read, because Anne Frank and high schoolers would be at a similar age. So you really get clocked in the head and realize how mortal your life truly is, and how honestly similar a high schooler would be to Anne Frank, because all of her thoughts, all of her opinions, that teenage angst, and everything that is written in the book is very human. Because if you end up omitting the name Anne Frank from this diary, you cannot tell me that you can discern a specific race, culture, identity, belief from this text alone. It writes very similar to what a teenager would write, and it's just devastating as a reader, especially as a high school reader whom you might be able to relate a lot more with, to realize that she's just a human being and she's very identical to what we are like as teenagers. And now we realize in the future what the atrocity that Nazi Germany has done. It just goes to show how wrong their idea of genocide was, and how Anne Frank and any other Jew have the same thoughts, feelings, emotions as any other human being living on this planet. And I think that's what makes this book so strong. I would say if you're looking for something specifically about World War II, Nazi Germany, and what Jewish people went through, I don't think this book is for you. It is very, as the title claims, a diary of a young girl. So you do have talks about boys, we have talks about like angst with their family, not anybody understanding themselves. And I think that's what makes the book powerful. But if you wanted to know more about the movement of the war and everything as such, you won't get that in this book. What was extremely heartbreaking for me was because I was pretty ignorant of this fact, and I'm happy that this book was able to even enlighten me a little bit and remind me, is I don't know why, it just never clicked in my head at the very least that the atrocity that Nazi Germany did to Jewish people didn't just stop at Germany, because as they were expanding across Europe, they were also rounding up any Jewish people in the countries that they have conquered. And I don't know, that just made it even more morbid. And I'm sad to say that I was ignorant about this fact, or at the very least, it just didn't click in my head. And I'm glad to have read this book and just have that kind of at the forefront of my mind now, or like the recognition of understanding. I don't think I purposely went out of my way to be like, no, they only did that in Germany, but it just never clicked. And that's what made the situation even worse. It was just that even when you thought you escaped, Nazi Germany expanded so fast across Europe that they really couldn't escape. And yeah, it's definitely a depressing and sad read. I just felt so sad for Anne Frank, because she's a girl, she's just living her life and she has to go into hiding, and she's making the best of the situation. Like, their hiding place is like a little nook, and they all have to come together and make the best of their time. And there's definitely rough times, conflicts of like just a small space with 6 different people, but they made do with what they had. And it was a very sad read. And then I think at the end was just terrible how close they were. They were so close in Germany being defeated, and it was just depressing that she didn't make it. And it's, again, morbid, and it shows how mortal we are, how mortal our lives are. And yeah, I wouldn't say I liked the book. It was definitely a hard read, but I think the audiobook really helped. It also really showcased that she is just a young girl. Overall, I thought the book was really enlightening, and I'm really glad that I picked it up for Banned Book Week. The banned book aspect of it is completely BS, and I think it's just people's way of trying to destroy and distort history, but that's just my opinion. Now let's move on to the very last book of today's video, which is The Broken Ring. This is the novel edition, so this is novel number 2, and I gave the read 5 stars. This is a very, very biased rating just because I've read the manhwa, I'm up to date with the manhwa, and I really love this book because I read up spoilers about it, so I know how it plays out. So the review might be pretty biased, and I'm happy to admit that. And it's also one of the first few books that I picked up since I've gone back into reading. So again, a lot of biases in play, but I'm not ashamed to admit it, all right? In novel 2, we're finally getting the nitty-gritty details of her previous lives, and we're finally seeing the slow romance between Carcel and Inez, and how they're slowly falling in love with each other, which I am here for, I'm rooting for. Of course, the biggest reason why I'm reading the novel and also reading the manhwa is that I heard that the novel has more expressions in the characters and a lot more details in the backstory, whereas in the manhwa, they try to translate a lot of that via images, and sometimes it might not be one-to-one or accurate. I will have to say, since I read both up to like the same area, I will say that the novel definitely gives a lot more background and details about the situation at hand. The little minute details are a lot more expressive in the novel than it is in the manhwa. Sometimes in the manhwa, it's just like a little foreshadowing. Maybe foreshadowing isn't the correct term. It's like hidden away on a layer of shadow. So because it's artwork, it's interpreted images, right? So maybe visually I didn't consume it fully in that aspect, and that's why it was a miss compared to the novel, but that's why I'm dual reading both, and I'm really enjoying the series so far. I do, however, recall a very old video of me saying this will probably be the book for 2024. Is that going to still be the case? We still have 2 more months left, so I guess we'll see, but I don't know if it's been dethroned. I'm trying to think back of all the books that I read in 2024. I don't think it's been dethroned yet, but it's so biased because I feel like if I didn't know about the spoilers, I don't know if I would have rated it as high. You know what I'm saying? So there's that. And now we are finally done with this probably hour-long video. It's definitely been way more than an hour for me to go through all of these books and ramble with all of you guys. It's late, I'm tired, but it is what it is. And this month has definitely been a lot of highs and then a lot of lows. Definitely a lot more lows than I'm used to, but it also gave me a lot of food for thought. It gave me a lot of thinking this month, and overall September was an intense reading month. I felt like I had a lot of opinions, thoughts. I was journaling a lot. I was just thinking about everything that I was reading, and I think academically it's a solid month, all right? I don't think I've ever worked my brain this hard when it comes to literature, so that's a really surprising aspect. And if you are still here after this long rambling session of all the books I read for the month of September, thank you so much for being here. And if you guys would not mind, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys next week for another video. Bye!